Good morning. So we're going to be having a little discussion about Kulturkampf. Not just about what the Kulturkampf is, but the consequences it had for its time period and even for today. But I'm sure some of you are wondering, what the heck is Kulturkampf? Well, I can tell you this, it's not a sneeze, it is a word. And Kulturkampf means culture. Culture comes from the German word Kultur, and then Kampf means struggle or war. And make no mistake about it, the Kulturkampf was a war. It was a war between the German state and how religion played within that state. So essentially you have two very powerful, strong-willed heads of state, Otto von Bismarck, the first Chancellor of Germany, and Pope Pius IX, Pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church, butting heads over issues of education, political policy, and how religion ties in to those most basic and most fundamental parts of German society. In order to understand this, we need to understand what is so important. Some of you may be thinking, okay, fine, so what is it about this Kulturkampf that is so important? It's important because it is a story that history tells us time and time again. It goes all the way back to the Middle Ages. The idea of state separating from church. For instance, the French Revolution is a very prominent example of desecularization within a nation. And even in this event alone had a profound impact on national policy when it comes to the churches within that nation. So when it comes to the Kulturkampf, the best thing to keep in mind is what drove these two power heads on their sides of the fence. Starting off with the church's struggle with the Kulturkampf. This would be the church's key player, Pope Pius IX. He is considered the last sovereign of the papal states. And he was seeing all these different nations not only building themselves, but also trying to remove religious control over the way they would run their own policies. This greatly alarmed him to the point to where in 1864 he penned what was known as the Syllabus of Errors. The Syllabus of Errors is basically a list that the Pope wrote of all of these different issues that he saw that were going wrong with these different nations. There were two in particular that came to mind. The first was that it is an error to believe that the Roman Catholic Church has a negative impact on politics, that the church has any sort of harm on how a nation is run. The other error, which probably seemed like a no-brainer, is the idea that to think that there should be a separation of church and state is not only heretical, it is a gross fallacy to even consider. And around the same time, he also convened what is known as the First Vatican Council. This is where we see the decree of papal infallibility come in. The idea of this doctrine was that a pope was above reproach. He should not be criticized, he should not be questioned, and not at any point should he be considered in error. So when you take a look at these rather extreme views, it kind of makes you wonder, why would he go to these extremes? This is why. He had a little issue in his own backyard where a bunch of the different kingdoms and duchies within Italy decided they didn't want to be ruled by the Vatican. They wanted to rule themselves. So in the first stage, you have the unification itself. There was a lot of civil war as these different kingdoms and countries were trying to unite together. And at the same time, they were trying to work with the Vatican to gain their own independence, which Pope Pius IX wasn't having. And then by 1961, they had united, and they began to expel papal armies out of the nations that had unified, which put the Pope in a bit of a pickle, because he was quickly losing territory, which he didn't like, but he was also losing support, which left him basically stuck in this corner of Italy, to where when King Victor Emmanuel marched into Rome, he gave the Pope a generous offer. He said that if the Pope relinquished the hold of Rome to this united country, that his life would be spent in ease. He would be left alone. He could have the 3 papal estates that he was fond of, and that his life will be relatively easy. Unfortunately, Pope Pius told King Victor where he could stick that offer, which led to King Victor saying that he was more or less going to make the Pope's life a living hell. However, the Pope wasn't too worried because he had France to support him. Unfortunately, France was being tied up by Germany in a different war because Germany was supporting the unification of Italy. This led to Pope Pius being forced to relinquish his rule of Rome in order to save what was left of the papal estates. And this is how the Vatican went from a country of several thousand miles of the Italian peninsula to about 108 acres, right in the middle of Rome. So when you consider this little crisis, it's no wonder that when Germany, who had played a role in this betrayal, said that they were going to become a united state, it's no wonder that Pope Pius threw up his hands and went, "This isn't happening again." However, I don't think he was planning on dealing with this gentleman. This is the key player for Germany, Otto von Bismarck, first Chancellor of Germany, who was born to a younger class, or the aristocracy class, in 1815. His father was a high-ranking officer in their army, and his mother, who took a great deal of his education, raised him in the rationalist philosophy that she embraced, which had a lot to do with his own views on social politics, as well as how policy should be taken care of. So he was a conservative statesman. He didn't want to do anything radical. But on the same token, he was also what you would call a realpolitik, which means that policy, when it comes to a nation, shouldn't be dictated by moral or religious principles. So when Otto von Bismarck came to power, Germany was dealing with its own issues, and they wanted to unite. But on the same token, they were also having to deal with their neighbors who weren't so keen on the idea, including Austria. So during this time frame, they had to fight a war with their neighbors, as well as dealing with how to establish their own identity, how to become their own confederation, where the northern half of the country was all for a unification. The southern half, which was 90% Catholic, was against the unification because they knew what happened in Italy and they saw what happened to their Pope. So they didn't want any part of this. So when you've got Otto von Bismarck trying to create laws to unite Germany, and you've got this little problem in your own backyard, you're going to figure out a way to take care of this little problem. And because of these laws, there was a rising antagonism between Germany and the Papal State. So when it came to the battle between these two great officials, it started with a failed attempt to negotiate with the Pope. King Wilhelm I wanted to have a treaty of peace with the Pope, but the Pope told him that as far as he was concerned, any baptized Christian in Germany was not a subject of King Wilhelm's. They were subjects of the Pope, which naturally didn't sit too well with the Kaiser, because you can't have a unified country if you have divided loyalties. And as far as von Bismarck was concerned, this made the Catholic Church a huge problem for Germany, which is why he started creating laws to kind of remove as much control from the Catholic Church within Germany as possible, because as he was concerned, any ordained cleric of the Catholic Church was not loyal to Germany. They were only loyal to the Pope, which meant they needed to be taken care of. So that's when you get the Kulturkampf laws. These different laws were put in place to remove not only the Catholic Church's control, but to also protect Germany from any other denomination taking the place of the Catholic Church. The first thing he did was he made sure that the clergy were silenced effectively. This was through the pulpit law, which states that the pulpit cannot be used by any member of the clergy to cause dissent, to speak out against the empire and the goals of that empire. If you were to do this, not only would you be heavily fined, you could be imprisoned for up to 2 years, and you will never be allowed to preach in Germany again. He also wanted to protect the state from holy orders, especially the Jesuits. The Jesuit law effectively banned immediately all holy orders, and members of those orders, but especially the Jesuits, were driven out of Germany immediately. They also took away the church's role in important life events, particularly marriage. Instead of going to the church, you had to go to the Justice of the Peace to have your marriage validated. Also, if you wanted to divorce your spouse, which was a pain in the neck if you were a Catholic, it was much easier to go back to that Justice of the Peace and say, hey, this isn't working out, and effectively end your marriage. And then the final major law was the May Law. This affected how clergy were ordained, because if you were approved by your church, that's all well and good, but that didn't give you the right to preach. You had to go through several policies. You had to go through several tests where you were quizzed on your loyalty to the empire, you were quizzed on your religious views, as well as these other heated issues. And only if you were selected by the high-ranking officials of the empire could you be given the right to preach. So when you consider how extreme these laws are, you would think that these are laws that are going to last forever, right? However, like with all things, the Kulturkampf did eventually come to a climax. Because there were other issues, especially social and political issues, that were taking more of von Bismarck's time and his concern, he put the religious issues on the back burner, and he started off by sending emissaries to Pope Leo XIII, who just took over for Pope Pius IX. And Pope Leo, having seen what's happened to the Vatican, he wasn't in the mood to have another crisis. So they were able to forge a concordat, an agreement that von Bismarck would take away a lot of the Kulturkampf laws in exchange for the Catholic Church supporting their cause and for not trying to go against their cause at all. Unfortunately, this did come with some consequences, because while the Catholic Church was having all these laws put against them, you had the Protestants who were just enjoying the heck out of watching the Catholic Church storm. So when you've got von Bismarck, who was considered their man, making these deals with the Pope, they saw it as betrayal. But they also had a worry that if von Bismarck was able to put these laws against the Catholic Church, and now he's rubbing elbows with the Pope, what's going to stop him from taking those same measures and putting them against the Protestants? This got them worried, and so they tried to find ways of removing Bismarck from the powerful position that he held. And fortunately for them, they found a way in. Because there was a change in Kaisers as well as popes. Kaiser Wilhelm II took over for his grandfather around the same time the Concordat was written and signed. And in Germany at the time, there was a lot of issues with the social aspects of the state. You had a lot of hungry, poor people who were not happy with the way government was treating them. And so social democracy was on the rise, as well as some ideas of socialism. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm II, while he wasn't a socialist, he did embrace the ideas of the Social Democrats, but von Bismarck did not. So while he levied laws against socialism, he tried to pacify the people by putting in national health care. He put in laws to better working conditions, and if you were having issues with employment, he put in some other social benefits to keep you afloat, thinking that this would pacify the people. Unfortunately, this was a gesture that came way too late, because as tensions mounted from the Protestant League, the German people, and then the Kaiser, who really didn't like von Bismarck to begin with, this gave the Kaiser what he needed to tell von Bismarck to step down, which Bismarck did very reluctantly in 1890. And to show just how unhappy he was with this situation, when he was writing his memoirs, he used a lot of inflammatory language when discussing the Kaiser. And then, just to have the last word after he died, he put in his will that he wanted a little message written on his tombstone. So when they mounted his tombstone, they chiseled into it, a loyal German servant of Emperor Wilhelm I. If that's not an epic last word, then I don't know what is. So when we consider the ideas of the Kulturkampf and how short it was, we tend to wonder what kind of a legacy, what kind of effect this drastic period in history has. Because it wasn't forgotten by the German people, especially when National Socialism was on the rise. When Adolf Hitler rose to power, he took a leaf from Bismarck's playbook, and one of the first things he did was reach out to the churches in Germany, to where a second Concordat was signed in 1933, with basically the same mild agreement that as long as the Catholic Church didn't speak against the party and cause dissent among the people, they would be free to practice religion as they so chose. And for the most part, they were left alone. This was never a war against religion. The only time there was issues was when different members of the clergy rose against the nation, and only then was there any retaliation against the church. So, when you have the Kulturkampf itself and the effect it has several years ahead, the thing to think of is, how do these events affect us today? Do we not see our own secularization? My hope is that you are seeing these signs that happened in Germany, and you're able to see it play within our own nation. And hopefully, we can learn from the Kulturkampf to have, and then with some analysis, see how it can affect our own nation so that we can act accordingly. Thank you. And a lot of resources. Any questions?
Well, students first. There's a lot of questions. Was Kaiser Wilhelm the head of the church in Germany? Say in Prussia before the Unification?
I believe he was.
Before the empire, we have confederation, so independent German states. What unification had done was to bring those states under federal authority. It's kind of like what happened in the United States, where you have independent colonies, they became independent states, and then you have articles of confederation. There was no federal government, and then only with the Constitution do we have federalism. So it was just like that, and those states had traditional rights. And one of those rights was determined religion, policy of religion. Cuius regio, eius religio. Whoever rules is religion. That goes way back to the Reformation. So you do have a kind of a jealousy about this. And I'm not sure it's right to say that Kaiser had jurisdiction over religion in a complete and full sense. The states' rights sense had remained, and you see that showing up in National Socialism. So Hitler tried to create a right church. He actually tried to up the ante and take control of the churches. He got resistance in certain key states, Württemberg and Bavaria and stuff. He backed down. Now I think Kristen is right that Hitler's primary concern was not religion. It was recover from the effects of the First World War and to get payback for what had happened to Germany. And so he was compromising on this question and allowed a confessing church, a dissenting church, which is Bonhoeffer's church, allowed that to exist and didn't persecute it or repress it. The only thing he asked is the same thing that Bismarck ended up asking, and that is, you enjoy your religious freedoms, but don't organize against the state, don't oppose us, which is basically what the German church did in Hitler's time. So you do see a kind of a continuation of an interesting tension going on in Germany as unification came about, prevents the Kaiser from being, and then later Hitler from being oppressive of the church, gave the churches freedom in return for their promise not to interfere. In some ways, that may seem like maybe the church a little bit less courageous in opposing. But then again, it goes back to this history, so you can kind of see why this deal between the state and the church could have translated into the churches not opposing Hitler's regime more forcefully than it did. Well, that was their history. That was the history going back 40, 50 years. So very interesting question.
Yes, Leah.
What would you suggest that we do now that we're able to see like the possible cause of this, like what are some action steps?
Well, given the fact that we are well within our election year, and we're seeing so much secularization happening in our streets, I mean, Christianity is dealing with oppositions now that it didn't even deal with 20 years ago. So, if anything, take a very good look at each of the candidates that we're being asked to vote for. Take a look at how they view religion. Would they prefer a complete secularization, or are they willing to work with religion? More than anything, I guess I'm pleading for there to be very careful thought when it comes to our own belief and our own value systems.
So is that to say that sometimes religion has a role to play
Yes.
in justice issues,
Yes.
but but also there's a danger that churches can become so aligned that they become co-opted by political parties. And it's the struggle, that Bismarck was trying to wrestle with, that the National Socialists, and yes, even in our own time, we struggle with as well. It's why looking at these episodes can give us something to compare to. It doesn't give us the answers, unfortunately.
No, but it gives us an idea of the warning signs.
Yeah. Pitfalls.
I'd be interested in going back to this Concordat of 1886 and why Bismarck was persuaded to sign that with Pope. It was opportune time, but I was wondering if there were some visible manifestations of opposition to the laws that were passed earlier.
Oh, absolutely.
So, were there guerrilla warfare? Was it demonstrations?
No. But there was a Catholic political party called the Center Party that Bismarck was constantly battling. And then, of course, you've got the Protestants who were supporting Bismarck so long as he was advocating their interests. But at the end of the day, he did have bigger fish to fry. He had a nation that was uniting, that needed to be led effectively. And if he's spending all of his energy fighting this struggle with religion, then that's just not effective. So might as well just see if you can build bridges to take that and put it in the back.
Kulturkampf is a classification, and his concerns with international farmland, those were more important issues. And so having this little civil war brewing, it didn't actually break out, in an intense way, although it was spin it that way. The Protestant League was formed in the same year the Unification in 1886. And they were organized. If you look at the original document, the Constitution of the Protestant League, it's very contempting anti-Catholic. And so in other words, Bismarck betrayed us. Now we've got a start of conflict that reigns in the Catholic Church and Protestant. Do we need another Reformation? No, Bismarck saying, oh my God, that's the worst thing that could happen. Germany has to remain united. So he's trying to navigate that at the end of his career, but he wasn't able to bring it in. And so it never really developed. What you're talking about, this full-blown virtual civil war, really, the Protestant Reformation, didn't actually materialize. But then again, he was out of office within a few years after that, contributed to the Senate law. He just kind of went on the back burner because we're only a few decades away from the First World War, and the politics that would really supersede all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's why it didn't work at all. Like we were describing. That would have been terrible.
Do you have an idea of what to propose? The percentage of Catholics in Germany would be after the Unification?
There was about, well, it depends on which part of Germany you're referring to.
Well, just thinking in total. Bavaria was very heavily Catholic.
Yeah, the southern states specifically were very Catholic. The further north you got, the more Protestant things were. So as far, if I had to estimate, I'd say between 30 and 40%. And that's if you're going by which half of the country.
So with the revocation of the laws, was religious schools, they were allowed to operate?
No.
Jurisdiction over that was part of this. That was some
The
kind of
state.
compromise afterwards, but Bismarck's intention was seize control. And so credentialing pastors, reining in what could be said from the pulpit, controlling the so-called sacraments, marriage, divorce, all these things.
Okay.
They're actually trying to.
But were those revoked when the Concordat
Yeah, I
was
don't.
signed?
Do you have anything to say about the actual laws themselves? Were they simply revoked?
They were revoked, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Everything except for the Jesuit laws.
So he sort of returned Catholic freedoms.
Yeah. The only thing he insisted on was that the state would have control over who was ordained, whether or not they were towing the line, and he was especially demanding that primary schools or elementary schools were under the jurisdiction of the state.
We had one other comment.
Yeah, just before, I was wondering, do the Protestants really help Wilhelm II with his power? Because they were so against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they put a bug in his ear that his chancellor was dangerous as well as a traitor. And given the fact that the Kaiser kind of saw Bismarck as his grandfather's man. Okay, my grandfather didn't know what he was doing, so he needed Bismarck, but I know what I'm doing, so I don't need Bismarck. So if anything, they just gave him one more excuse to send Bismarck packing, which he was more than happy to use.
Interesting, because they had Protestants were immensely in favor of, and actually were pressuring, like many German people, pressuring the Kaiser, even against his own good instinct, to get involved in the First World War. So this whole story somehow figures into that. Very good question.
And the Oedipus conflict.
That's interesting. Let's not go there. We don't need Sigmund Freud. Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you all for coming. All right.
Didn't give you the 5 minutes.